Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOonline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today was raised in Park Rapids, Minnesota, and graduated from Nevis, Minnesota. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees in business and economics and secondary education, also holds a dual master's degree in business administration, hospitality, and tourism. She's been teaching and training in martial arts for over a decade, and in 2017, took the leap and opened her own school just down the road from my house in Moorhead, Minnesota. When she isn't running her school, her and her husband own Olson Awning and Canvas, the shadiest business in town. She also enjoys outdoor activities like kayaking and fishing, a fellow kayaker. I love it. She loves to travel, try new food, and enjoys cooking. Please welcome my guest today, Alexis Potter. How are you doing today, Alexis?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time. I'm glad we're doing this. I'm very excited to get to know you more.
I'm excited too.
Well, as you know, you said you listened to some episodes and kind of how we kick things off. I want to go back to that very beginning, and I want to know where that first spark came from, that first interest in martial arts, and kind of what kicked off your martial arts journey.
Sure. So I guess if I had to go way back before I even actually took my first martial arts class, I guess I'd have to give some credit to the Ninja Turtles. Nice. As a young kid. Definitely it was like the first introduction to anything martial arts related. When all the other boys were playing with martial arts or with the Ninja Turtles, I wanted to do that too. Everybody loved Michelangelo. I was definitely more a Leonardo fan. Okay. So that was kind of my get into anything martial arts related. From there, I was introduced to Walker, Texas Ranger, cool. Became obsessed with like Chuck Norris and that whole genre of martial arts and action movies. In 4th grade, those projects where you have to write a paper about somebody famous. Mm-hmm. I picked up Chuck Norris, of course. And then, yeah, I did. I thought, and actually I remember having to argue with my teacher because we actually had to pick from like a hat about like either a movie star or an athlete. And I drew athlete, and I tried to make an argument that Chuck Norris was an athlete so that I could do this paper. And then, so thus I won the argument and wrote a paper about Chuck Norris. And in doing that research, I realized he had done movies, and I didn't know that other than my exposure to Walker, Texas Ranger. So then, of course, I had to watch all of his movies, and then that kind of opened the floodgate to all kinds of action movies. So my dad let me watch everything from like Rocky to the Die Hards to Rambo, you name it. That whole genre of action movies was kind of my thing. And then from there, being in Nevis, taking actual martial arts classes wasn't really a thing people did in that area. So that wasn't really an option. So then 6th grade rolled around. I got asked to play basketball. And then from basketball, I kind of went into, the volleyball, softball, high school athletics. So my interest in martial arts kind of faded early on. I'd read like as many martial arts books I could get my hands on from the local library, but again, not being able to train in martial arts at that point in time. So it just kind of took a back seat. So it kind of faded out of my life and my interest. Then after that, I kind of grew up. I went to college. I went to Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin, played volleyball and softball for them.
Nice.
And then I enjoyed that. I was kind of been pretty athletic, and then after college, I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And then my mom was like, well, if you don't really know what you're going to do, you should probably do some more school. So I was like, which I didn't know was probably the best response for my mom to give me, but I thought, what the heck? So I went and applied to NDSU and MSUM for teaching and NDSU to get my MBA. I'd always wanted to go to NDSU. When I graduated, NDSU was kind of in that transition of going from D1 to D2 softball. And so playing softball for them really wasn't an option, which is why I ended up going to Northland College.
Okay.
So then I came back, I got into the MBA program at NDSU, and life just has this weird way of throwing you curveballs. I remember sitting in my first couple MBA classes at NDSU, and I met this amazing professor, and he came up to me one day and said, "Alexis, why are you in this program?" And I said, I don't know. And he's like, probably not a good answer.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I really appreciated the fact that he took the time to get to know me. So we sat down and we talked about, my interests and things like that. And we decided that a dual master's program with a hospitality tourism emphasis was probably where I really wanted to be at that point in time. I'd worked seasonally in restaurants and hotels growing up. I worked at Companeros in Dorset for over a decade. So I just really enjoyed that restaurant industry. And then from there, I applied and actually went to school in Southern Cross University in Australia. It's because they had an amazing MBA hospitality program. So I did my one semester at NDSU. I got done in December. I packed up my bags after Christmas and flew to Australia.
Wow, so that's cool.
It was a leap of faith, and it was really exciting. And I'd always wanted to travel international and study abroad. But again, being from Nevis, those opportunities weren't just readily available. Mm-hmm. So I decided to do that. I got to Australia, and I thought, being an athlete, I should find something. I should at least stay in shape and go find a gym and meet people. And that's, what they say to do. So it's interesting in Australia, though, because you don't just walk around and find Anytime Fitnesses or Planet Fitness. Those gyms just aren't right in your face in Australia. Yep. It took me a few days, and I was walking around because I didn't have a car there. So I had to walk everywhere. And so I was walking, and one day I was walking around this block, and I heard these kids playing basketball and into this gym. And I walked into this gym, and on my right, there were kids playing basketball. And on my left, I looked, and there was these guys. At the time, I didn't quite know exactly what they were doing, but they were boxing. And I walked up to the door, and this guy comes up to me, and he's like, "Are you here for boxing classes?" I said, "No, I'm not registered." I just kind of looked at him, and he's like, "Well, do you want to give it a try?" And I thought, sure. Really? Okay. So I ended up taking boxing classes. That was my first real introduction to anything physical for martial arts. So I took a year of boxing in Australia. Absolutely loved it. It was just the most intense, exciting thing I'd ever done. Didn't do any competing, just training, and loved it. From there, I graduated in December, and again, life happens. So I didn't really know what I was doing. So, when you don't know what you do, you just throw darts at the board and see what sticks, so to speak. So I interviewed for a bunch of jobs, and I got a call back from a Canadian company who was recruiting Australians to go work at the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver.
Wow.
So I got the job offer, and I told them, yes, I would be very interested in working at the 2010 Olympics, but I have a confession. And they go, "Oh, what's that?" "I'm American." And they're like, "Oh," because I was in Australia, and I was very concerned because with work visas and whatnot. And they said, "No problem. You just have to stop at the border and meet our manager, and he'll give you your visa." And I said, "Okay." And so I went and worked at the Olympics in Vancouver. Actually, I was stationed up in Whistler, which was amazing. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And then from there, I got recruited to go work in Alaska at the Glacier Bay National Park. So I worked there as an operations manager for Glacier Bay and did that for about 5 seasons. Absolutely loved it. Best experience ever. I'd highly recommend Glacier Bay to anybody. It's a fantastic place to visit. And then after that, after about 5 seasons of that, the company I was working for ended up going through a restructuring. So they were bringing on a whole new management team, changing things out. So I knew I wouldn't be going back. So I was like, close that chapter, so to speak. And then when you don't know what to do, you come home. Mm-hmm. So I went home and talked to my mom and dad. And my mom, she roped me into going on one of those multi-generational road trip things. So I was was like my mom and my aunts and my grandma. And my mom is originally from Wilton, North Dakota.
Okay.
So we hopped in the car and picked up my grandma and my aunts in Fargo, and we headed west. And we went and, did all the, the family things. We went and saw the family farm in Wilton. And anyway, but the big stop, well, we stopped at the Veterans Memorial Cemetery. That's where my grandfather is buried. So we stopped there. But of course, the big stop was the Prairie Knights Casino, because that's, the highlight of their trip. So like, it's just not, gambling's not my thing, but I was a good sport about it. And so we get to the casino, and again, not being my thing, my mom's like, here's $40. Go play blackjack. And my dad, that's the one thing my dad had taught me. I knew how to play blackjack. So I went over to the blackjack table and I started playing blackjack and struck up this conversation with the blackjack dealer. And I told him, they do like, what are you doing in town and that sort of thing. And I was like, well, I'm here with my, my mom and my grandma and my aunts and stuff. And it's not really my thing. And he goes out of nowhere. He goes, well, if you're not doing anything tomorrow, I'm hosting a self-defense seminar in Bismarck. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, so I go back to my hotel room and tell my mom, I said, hey, would you mind if I go check out this self-defense seminar in Bismarck? And she's like, sure. So she gives me the car, because of course they were going to have breakfast and, hang out at the hotel and whatnot. And so I go to this self-defense seminar and meet Shou Martin from Minot. And he and this other blackjack dealer were co-hosting a self-defense seminar. And it was like a 2-hour seminar. I just felt instantly in love with this like concept of empowerment and hitting stuff and being an athlete. I guess maybe I was looking for something, and it just really resonated with me. And he recognized right away that I was fairly athletic, and he's like, hey, you're pretty good at this. And I was like, thanks. And I was enjoying it. And after the seminar, he said, hey, I'm going to test some of my students. If you want to stick around and watch, you're welcome to do so. And I thought, okay, sure. I had no idea what martial arts was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about testing. Like, that was a whole new thing. And so I remember sitting there in the bleachers watching him, what at the time sounded to me like barking out commands, and so I was watching these lower ranks at the time test, and then he got up to some of his upper ranks, and I remember watching specifically this younger female student, and she, just the way her body moved, it was just almost mesmerizing. And then the assistant instructor, I remember watching him like go out and like try to choke her or tackle her, and she just like dismantled him, and I was like, oh my God, like that is the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, I want to be able to do that. And I remember afterwards, Shou Martin came up to me and he's like, hey, if you're ever in Minot, we'd love to have you come train with us. That would be so cool. And I was like, yeah, and that'd be neat, and I was like, thanks for the offer. And I was really respectful and stuff. And I went back to the hotel room and I told my mom, I was like, hey, I went to this awesome thing today, and I really think that this is something I'd be interested in doing. And my mom was like, well, we have second cousins in Minot, right? And I was like, no, like the cousins that I'd maybe met twice in my life at weddings, like didn't even know who these people were. Yep. And then she was like, you're not doing anything this fall, right? And I was like, right, I don't know what I'm doing yet. And she's like, there's an oil boom going on in North Dakota right now, right? And I'm like, no, really hadn't crossed my mind, Mom. So she's like, well, I'll call your cousins. Maybe they got an extra bedroom if it's something you're serious about. And next thing I know, we went home. I packed my bags, moved to Minot, North Dakota, lived with cousins I'd never really met, and started training with Shou Martin 5 days a week, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that kind of kicked it off. So.
Wow. That's quite the story. How long did you stay in Minot?
5 years. I trained with him 5 years, 5 days a week, twice a week. Just head over heels into it. I just did it. So
that's so awesome. Wow, I have so many questions popping into my head right now. That's like, wow. First of all, I've never been to Australia. That's on my bucket list. I want to go to Australia, which is cool. I love that you've been there. And also, you actually, one of my side jobs, I'm a sports PA announcer, and I actually announce basketball, volleyball, and softball, which are the three sports. And I actually announce volleyball and softball for NDSU. So
nice.
Yeah, and basketball for Concordia. So yeah, three sports that I love watching and love announcing. So that's really, really cool. Nothing to do with martial arts, but hey, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is.
Nice.
It is.
So you started right away. Now, At what point, at what level, and how long after you had moved to Minot did you get involved in the competition side of things? Did you not yourself?
So I didn't. Shou is very self-defense based. It's very originally early on, I was kind of, we were told, and I was under the impression that like we didn't do a lot of training because what we're told is and taught is that self-defense is the primary focus of Shou. And so we teach, arm bars and eye gouges and hitting them to the groin and all the self-defense, like really brutal things you need to know for self-defense purposes. So it doesn't really blend into competing real easily, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so we have to, so if I was going to compete, then it's like, okay, well, then we have to train differently. Like, okay, now we can't kick to the head or we can't punch to the head and all the things you do in self-defense. So I didn't actually start out competing. It wasn't really until much, much later on, actually after I had gotten my black belt, that I did any competing. We did in-school competing, but nothing outside of our system.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So what are some things that stand out about your instructor, your first instructor? I mean, you obviously stayed with it for 5 years. I'm guessing a lot had to do with your instructor and a lot had to do with the style. Kind of what was it, some things that you remember about your instructor that really stood out?
Sure. So he himself is just a phenomenal martial artist. I really enjoyed the way he was able to make techniques come alive and not just being like monotonous in terms of like step one is this, step two is this. Like his strength, it was making them real. And the application of what he was doing was really important to me because that's how my brain works. Like I need to see how this would work. And because I think a lot of times when you watch people do, for lack of better terms, like air karate and in the air, you're like, what the heck are they doing? Like, what is that really going to work? What is that? And so he was always good at making the transition to real life application for me. And so I just absolutely loved that. And then his ability to like really think about the anatomy of how you get your body to move to generate like maximum power, so to speak. Like that was really important to me and it really resonated with what I wanted to get out of my training. I didn't just want to, get belts and break boards. And not that that stuff isn't cool and doesn't have its place, but I really wanted to have something that was real life, real world, that if I was ever to be attacked, that I'd feel confident enough to defend myself.
And I have to admit, when you first opened your school and I saw the story about it in the local newspaper, that was the first I'd actually heard of Shou. I knew nothing about it. And I know a lot about martial arts. So just talk a little bit about the style and kind of like the background, maybe a little bit about the history of it for listeners who maybe are like me and didn't know anything about it at first.
Sure. So Shou is a Chinese form of self-defense. Shou roughly translates to like beast way or the fighting way of the beast or animal. And it's an animal art. So I always tell parents that it's very similar to like if they've seen Kung Fu Panda. Like it's an animal art. So we do bear and crane and tiger and mantis and mongoose and ultimately your dragon styles. But at the end of the day, like a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick. And but what makes us really special is just that drew me to it in the first place was that application of a self-defense. We, like the first right off the get-go, we teach kids like, okay, if somebody tries to hit you on your head, like you got to do an upper block and then like how to deal with those real in-your-face confrontation sort of situations.
Okay, cool. So what are some things you remember about your black belt test? Kind of what was that experience like?
Intense. It's, and actually like in our art, you don't always know when you're being tested. So my instructor's instructor and a lot of the roots of Shou, even though it's a Chinese art, it's very predominant in California. And my instructor's originally from California. So we spend a lot of time going back and forth to California, getting upper level training or more in-depth training, or just to, have family and community with our other schools in California. And so it was intense. I remember going and for what I thought was just a routine training by myself. My instructor didn't unfortunately be able to make that trip. And I went and I did 4 days of training and I thought I did great and I loved it. And I remember coming back and he just being like, dude, why'd you biff it? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, they were looking at you for your black belt. And I was like, interesting. And I remember thinking when I got back from that 4-day training, and it was intense. It was really intense. And I was thinking, and I remember Friday night, I remember a girl getting her black belt, and I remember being just frustrated. I'll put it that way. I was frustrated because I thought, man, I knew if I had to fight her competitively one-on-one, I would have crushed her. Like, that's what I kept telling myself. I was like, I don't understand why she got hers and I didn't get mine. And I don't know what I did wrong. And I thought I did pretty good. I thought, but he apparently I didn't do something. And so I didn't even know I was being tested. And so he's like, it's okay. There's another opportunity in 6 months to go back. And so I did. And I remember going back 6 months later and knowing at this point, like, it was on the line, and so I remember going, and I remember it was intense. It was 4 days of very brutal training, to say the least. Shou is not at the upper echelon, so to speak. It's not very, how do I put this? It's not very, I don't want to say it's not female friendly, but there just isn't a lot of females at that level. Okay. And so I remember being, for example, in the group I was in, there was probably 20 students and I was the only female. Wow. And I remember, and I was the youngest, well, I wouldn't say the youngest, I was the lowest ranking at the time because I was what they call a black prep. And I remember this fifth degree standing in front, and I don't know if he just didn't want a female there or what. I didn't really know what was going on, but I remember him calling me up at one point and he was, telling me, talking to me and stuff. And just more or less taunting me, kind of in a martial arts sort of hazing way, like, come on, if you're going to do this, you got to be tough, you got to be strong, that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, like, this is going to go one of two ways, and I don't know which way it's going to go. And I remember him telling me flat out that he was going to punch me. And I was like, okay. And this fifth degree, and he was, I don't know, like, what looked in my mind looking back at it must have been like 6'8", 280 pounds, just like this biggest guy I'd ever seen in my entire life, wow. Like, and I'm short. And I remember thinking, he's told me he's going to punch me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just stand here. And he's like, you better block. And I'm like, okay. And I knew he was going to give it all he got, right? Like, and I was like, okay. And so he went to punch me. He was talking to all the guys, and I was standing, he had his back to me, and I was like, he's going to turn around and punch me. And of course he turns around and he goes to throw his punch, and he stops short of anywhere near me to actually, like, hit me. And I thought, okay, this is not gonna. And then rather than him punching me, I remember him calling up the second degree, and he told the second degree, you punch her and knock her out, or I'm going to demote you. And I was like, oh, wow. No. And wow. I was like, it was intense. It was intense. And I was like, okay, it's going to be him or me. I see how this is going to go. And I remember thinking, okay, I can do this, And then he tells me, the fifth degree calls out a technique, and he says, you have to use this technique on him. So it wasn't even that I could do anything I wanted. I had to do this very specific technique into this second degree black belt. And I remember looking at this guy going, hey, it is what it is, right? Like, it's fine, And I didn't, just because he knew that, like, this, if it was, literally him or me. And so I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And I remember the black belt, the second degree black belt, throwing a punch. And the next thing I know, he was on the ground. And so I was like, wow. It just kicked in. And yeah, I don't even, I know the technique to this day I had to use. Mm-hmm. And then I helped him up, and we went and both sat down and went on with our training, and there were other incidences similar to that occurred over the 4-day period. But I think that was probably the one. There was another one, but that was probably the one that stood out the most in my mind, knowing that technique to this day and just being like, yeah, okay, this is real. This stuff that they teach that I need to know how to do is real.
So did he actually get demoted?
He did not. Okay. He did not, thank goodness. But I knew, like, I think he was like, which was good, and I was glad. But I was
motivation.
Like, just a little, like, So
that is so crazy and insane. I mean, yeah. Wow. That's why I love hearing about others' black belt tests, just because there's every style, every school, they're so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're crazy. I mean, mine was. I used to think mine was insane when it was like 2.5 hours. When I've talked to these people, it's like 4 days and 18 hours, and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's so cool. Nice. So then you obviously you passed that time. You got your black belt and went
yes.
back. So now, had you started teaching at that point? Were you assisting with class, or did that not start till after your? I know some styles they won't let you teach until you're a black belt.
Oh, no, I'd been teaching pretty much from the get-go with my training with Shou, Martin, and Minot. It's pretty much after I got like my third or fourth belt. Like, I was probably the lowest rank that he probably ever let teach. Maybe, I'm not really sure.
Wow.
I had done I'd had experience teaching before. I'd coached youth softball, and I'd tutored in college, and done a bunch of like teaching. So, and then being a hospitality, I don't know, maybe just thought I was good with people and kids. So, and I love teaching kids, obviously. So I just kind of jumped right in, and he hold bags. He showed me how to hold bags. You know, that's how you start. You got to learn how to hold bags, because having a good bag holder makes the world of a difference, you know? So he showed me how to hold bags and started me out in kids class. And then, yeah, pretty much started teaching from when I was like, well, in our system, a purple belt, you know?
Okay.
So did that all the way through. And then when I got my black belt, pretty much from brown in our system, from brown belt to black belt, teaching is mandatory.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So you have to teach, you have to give back, you have to put in teaching hours,
That's cool.
to get your black belt. And then from there, what a lot of people don't know is when we get our black belt, you get your black belt, but you're not technically a first degree yet.
Oh, okay.
So when you get your black belt, you have to train for another 6 months. And during that 6 months, you're required to teach your own classes under the supervision of a head instructor.
Okay.
And so you teach your own classes for 6 months, and then they make you do your black belt test all over again.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. To make sure you haven't like sloughed off, or you didn't want to just get your black belt for resume building or this sort of stuff. And so so then you have to teach and train and give back to the system for at least a minimum of 6 months and then they make you retest, which at that point, hopefully you've been training and practicing. And the second time around, it's super easy, right?
Yeah.
It's still not that easy, but it's a lot easier than the first time, because you know what to expect, so to speak. And yeah, so then I got my official first degree. And then from there, I talked to Shou Martin and was like, where do I go from here? And he's like, well, let's work on your teaching. And at that point, I'd kind of expressed some interest in maybe opening my own school someday. And he said, well, if we're going to do that, then let's get an internship program going. Even though I'd been working with him, training with him forever, it was like, let's make this a little more official. And you need to create your own program, And so I thought, okay, well, I'm in Minot. What does that look like? And so there's, of course, Velva and Surrey and Max. And so I petitioned to do an after school program for those smaller communities. And so I went out to Max 2 days a week, and then I went out to Velva and Surrey 2 days a week and kind of started my own programs. And I taught those for 2 years.
Now, when you left, were you able to let someone take those over?
So we did have some, I know Shou Martin had a couple coming up underneath me that did it for a little while. I think, unfortunately, they kind of phased out. I know which is unfortunate. But you gotta have the staff and the people interested in stuff. So I do feel bad about that. I wish those were programs that, we could have kept alive.
Yeah.
I know a couple of the students from Surrey did end up driving into Minot.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, did any of them stick with it? So that's good. That's good that they did.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's those are your babies. So you started that from scratch. I mean, you obviously care about that. So that's kind of cool. So then when the decision came to move to Fargo Moorhead, was that already in your mind? I want to open a school when we get here.
Yes, kind of. It was kind of a trifecta of situations that kind of occurred. I was training with him, and I absolutely loved it. But I got my parents from the Park Rapids, Nevis area were getting a little older, and I was feeling kind of the pull to like maybe move a little closer to home. And then I was also like getting to that point in my life where I'm like, if I'm ever gonna like settle down and have a family, I should probably take this dating thing a little more serious, So like, so I was like, where? And then I talked to Shou Martin about like, okay, so probably needing to start thinking about opening my own school or doing something like that, because if I ever want to become a full-time martial artist and make a living at it, so to speak, I'm gonna have to have my own school and grow my own school. And with his blessing, we kind of talked about it, and we looked into the area and found an opportunity here in Moorhead to do that. And with his blessing, we jumped in, and I opened a school here in Moorhead. So
cool. And now it was 2017, right? So it's been 6 years.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're in the old Hardee's building, which I love. Every time I drive by that, like, yeah, so Hardee's used to be.
No, kind of an odd transition, but it works great.
It does. It's a good location. I mean, it's obviously done well for you and stuff. And so, what are a couple of things that just from opening? I mean, obviously, it's a lot different than going into like an after school program in an existing building versus having your own spot. What are a few maybe the challenges you run into, or something that, man, I wish I would have known that, back then I would have done that a little differently. Anything that stands out from that?
That's a tricky question. I guess mostly I think a lot of people don't think about the things that I maybe went to school for from a business standpoint. So having a business degree allowed me those things that a lot of times get overlooked, like understanding overhead and insurance and billing and accounting and things like that. So my schooling really kind of helped take up a lot of the slack that probably would have happened in those areas had I not had that experience. Nice. So that was really fortunate to have that. I think as with all, I think martial arts schools, I think the biggest struggle we've had since opening was COVID. Of course, that had a huge impact. So we're fortunate and excited that we made it through that and survived that. So I think that was probably our biggest challenge.
You mentioned COVID. I'm just kind of wondering, how exactly did that affect your school? Did you guys have to close down for a certain amount of time? With the kind of martial arts you teach, it's very hands-on. Were you able to do anything during COVID, or did you have to close for a while?
So we had to shut down. Being on the Minnesota side, we were required to shut down. So we did shut down. But the nice thing is with our platform, we do a lot of training videos online. So we were able to have Zoom classes. And so we did a lot. It was kind of interesting. The kids were in the living rooms of their houses and their kitchens and things like that. So it was a little awkward, but it was still good to be able to communicate with them and try to keep those relationships going. And then those kids that were into it during COVID, we were able to, most of them came back. So the ones that were able to watch the videos online and were really dedicated, those were the students that stuck with it. Of course, you lose some, overall, but for the most part, those ones that were really dedicated took to those training videos. I answered questions over the phone. I would send text messages. Yeah, we made it work. It was definitely a struggle though.
And you actually answered that other question, because I was going to ask, how many did you lose anyone? Because that's everyone I've talked to that had shut down during COVID at least lost a small percentage. I think most of the ones I talked to, over 90% of their students came back, which is good.
Yeah, the kids definitely stayed back. I saw probably the most loss with my adult students, but the kids, ironically, they were the ones that were the diehards. They were the ones that stuck it out. So that was kind of a neat dynamic for me. They were, asking their moms and dads like, hey, we got class tonight, or, they were more nervous if they couldn't attend class, so it was kind of interesting. And then we were creative, like, okay, take this, like couch cushion, and then use that and like jump over that and try to, because they don't have equipment at home, right. So we had to get really creative and like using soup cans for like your angles and footwork and going around, soup cans instead of cones. And yeah, we had some fun with it. So
think back to, when you were in Minot, you were still I think you said a blue belt when you first started teaching and helping out, to now. You've been running your own school now for 6 years. What has changed the most about your teaching style over the years?
I think just in general being more confident, right? The more you do stuff, the more confident you're in at teaching it. I think teaching every day, though, I still learn. The more you do it, the more you get better at like your classroom management style in terms of like, oh, well, that didn't work. I better not put those two kids together, so, yeah. Or different, and then teaching different ages and learning the mat management. I remember, again, Shou Martin did a great job of preparing me, as did, our other black belts in California for just mat management. Cause I don't think that's something that comes with normal training unless you tell them like, hey, you want to do this. And I remember when I first started teaching, it's like, how often do you give them water breaks, or how much is too much before you give them a break, or where do you stand to give optimal vision of what you're teaching, and how often do you move around the mat and check each group, or do you do the drill for 30 seconds, or do you do drills for 5 minutes, or, just all those things that you don't really think about when you're just in a class that goes into teaching martial arts. And I think that's something that I really am thankful for, that he gave me great guidance in, as did, like I said, some of the other black belts in California that I was fortunate enough to intern with or train with out there.
You talked about opening your school, and I want to back up a little bit. You said, when you were first got involved in that school and when you were like testing and stuff, you were one of very few female students. So when you were opening your school, was that something that was on your mind? Was that any kind of struggle? Because I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but just even doing my show, I struggled just to find female guests. I mean, were you worried that maybe it would be harder for a female school owner, female instructor, or did that not even cross your mind?
It didn't even cross my mind. I think before I opened my school, there was a lot of pushback to like, oh, you're not going to make it. And, that sort of stereotype stuff. But not once was I ever concerned about not making it. I am confident in my teaching. I know I was great with kids. I was kind of like, oh, maybe not with the adults. That will take more time convincing the community or convincing adults that like I know what I'm doing. But I was never concerned about making the school a success. It might just be that my dynamic or my geographic of my students might be a little bit more heavy towards the kids, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. And then with that came the parents, and so then the parents then brought more adults, and so it just kind of grew that way.
Nice. And I love that, because that's something that, I told this story I can't remember if I actually told it on the podcast, but I know I told it to one of my guests. I was at a tournament years ago. This was like probably 20 years ago. And there was a female instructor there with her students. And I remember the instructor had walked away from some of her students, and another instructor actually walked over, tried to poach her students, and actually made some kind of comment like, well, who do you want to teach you how to fight, a man or a woman? And I was standing like 5 feet away, and I'm like, you didn't actually just do that, you jerk. I'm like, wow. Wow. I know. And here's one you'll appreciate. When I lived in California, me and my buddy went and just toured a bunch of schools, and we went to one school, and I can't remember the style. I don't remember that, but the grandmaster who was running it, first of all, he did little to nothing. He just walked around and told people what to do. He didn't do any techniques himself. He just kind of like pointed a stick and told people what to do. But the worst part, we were watching the class and they were doing exercises, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they said something like, all right, class, 50 sit-ups. And then he paused and he's like, and females 25. And like every exercise, he cut it in half for the women. I know. And me and my friend looked at each other. We're like, we have students that would probably go out there and kick his butt for even attempting to do that.
Yeah, there was when you're on my mat, doesn't matter, what gender you are, you're a student. We don't, and I have a lot of boy students who are like, oh, with their girl partners. And I was like, no, you train, they're a student, they're a karate student. They're not a boy or a girl. They're just, they're your classmate, you go out there and you train. So yeah. And it's hard for them sometimes to get over that, but it's good. And the same thing with like, I have a lot of like a male students come in and that are maybe older than me. Mm-hmm. And, I tell them, I don't have to prove anything to you, and I'm not here to beat you up. Like, I'm here to make you a better martial artist. And, if you're open-minded, I've got lots I can teach you. And at first they're hesitant. And then I have assistant instructors who are male, and I have them hold bags. And the moment I start pointing stuff out, they're like, oh, she knows what she's talking about. I'm like, you're not rotating your hips, or you're not turning your feet, and then they're like, oh, and so then they give me more credit. But I think at first there's some hesitance, especially with, the adults. So
I like it. Awesome. So then from your first year starting in 2017, how many of your students from then are still with you? Have you had a number that have stuck with it the whole time and really dedicated themselves?
Yeah, I would probably say I have about a dozen that have been with me from the get-go. So, and
how many have you brought to black belt in that time?
Actually, at this point in time, none.
Oh, okay.
So and I've got a couple that are close. And by close,
COVID probably hurt that too, I suppose.
There's some of that. I think a lot of people underestimate how long it takes to get a black belt. Right. And our style is probably one of the longer. Similar to like, I often try to compare us in terms of timeline. When you think about arts like jiu-jitsu that take much longer to get your black belt, right. Shou probably falls closer in that line. It takes, good 5 to 7 years, like almost minimum, I would say. Oh, wow. And that's assuming that you're training at least 2 days a week. So it can take a while.
So at what point and at what level did you decide that you were going to have your students start doing the competition thing? Did one of them come to you and say, hey, I want to do this tournament? Or was this something that you went to them and said, hey, we have this opportunity? What do you guys think? Kind of how did that, because that's where I met you, was at a tournament. And I know you guys have actually had some success at some tournaments. So how did that kind of start? Yeah.
So again, that was kind of Shifu Martin's kind of push, in the sense that he brought some of his students to the Fargo Open the year I opened my school here in town. And I didn't even know it was a thing. And he told me, he's like, hey, I'm going to bring some kids down to do this tournament at the Fargo Open. They said we can come as long as we play by the rules, so to speak. And I said, sure. And so I went up to, at the time, at North High or whatever, and watched the competition. And I thought, you know what, next year I want to bring some of my own students. And that just kind of started it off. And then I was fortunate enough to be let into the fold, so to speak, with the other schools in the region. And we've been fortunate enough to go to other tournaments and enjoy being part of that family as well.
And I've talked to other instructors, heard nothing but amazing things about your students and just, the manners and the respect. And so I love to see that. That's so cool because that reflects on the instructor a lot. So you're obviously doing it right.
Thank you.
Now you've run your own school for this time. You've trained you trained in boxing, you trained in another school, in Minot. What is some advice you would give someone who's thinking of getting involved in martial arts for the very first time? They know nothing about it and they just want a couple tips, hey, what should I look for in a school and maybe some things I should avoid?
Sure. I think for me, don't just maybe try one school, try multiple schools. At one point in my life, I had the opportunity to try other martial arts schools. A lot of schools do that, free trial or whatever, and try different schools, try to figure out what you like. Everybody likes something different. But I think for me personally, the most important thing is the instructor. It doesn't really matter what style. I mean, you want to like the style for sure, but the instructor makes or breaks a good martial arts school to me.
Definitely. 100%. I don't know how many of my episodes you've listened to, but I've told the story a handful of times. One of my first instructors when I moved up to this area was basically John Kreese from Karate Kid. He was a horrible person, horrible instructor, and I almost got to the point where I quit martial arts completely because of him. So it's luckily I found Master Jim and switched to his school and got very lucky with that. But yeah, it's the instructor is so important. And I just told another guest the other day, I feel bad for people who grew up in a small town like a Nevis. I grew up in Little Falls, Minnesota, and I grew up. There was one school in my town. I had no choice. I mean, luckily that was a good instructor. But I didn't have. I was 10 years old. I couldn't drive 30 miles to St. Cloud or Brainerd and go to another school or something like that. If I wanted to train in martial arts, I was training in Tung Sido because that's all we had at the time. So,
yep.
So you mentioned you had tried some other. What are some of the other styles you tried out, and what are maybe some things you liked about them?
Sure. So I definitely, personally, I would also like to improve my jiu-jitsu game. I like that. That's something that's of interest to me. So I want to continue to train when I have the opportunity to do that in that style. Nice. I've tried some Okinawan karate. I really enjoyed that. I've done a few seminars with those people and really enjoy that. Again, it's just having the opportunity. I don't get a chance to train that style very often. I've tried some different Taekwondo schools down Iowa City. I was down there doing some training for a business career I had at one point in my life. And so I tried out they have lots of martial arts down there. And so I think I tried out 5 different martial arts schools, and nice. Some of them were good and some of them were not. And every school is different. And like you said, every school has a different culture. So you want to find a school that fits your morals and your values and the culture you want to be in. So
is there a style you haven't got to train in yet that you'd love to just try sometime? Maybe you read about it or seen it in a movie, or someone else who does it in another state, and you're just I'd love to try that style.
I think for me, any of the Filipino martial arts, yes. The Japanese, any of those really pure Eastern styles are always fascinating to me.
I'm actually, I don't want to give anything away, but I'm hoping to bring someone up to do some Kali and some Filipino stuff as a seminar up in this area. So I will definitely let you know if that happens. So,
please do. Yeah. That'd be great.
Fingers crossed. So we'll see. So now you primarily train in a very traditional martial art, very self-defense based. What are your thoughts on something like MMA and the UFC, and is that something you're a fan of?
I think it has its place for sure. I definitely have nothing against it. It's not personally. At one point, I'd contemplated it. Before I opened my school, it was kind of do I, train hard and do the, try it, and I'd contemplated it. I don't have anything against it. Mm-hmm. I don't. The hardest part I personally struggle with it is from a pure martial arts standpoint. I worry about ego and, are they getting, what kind of people are they? For me, a martial arts is a lifestyle. It's about having those core values. And sometimes I worry in that line of training that you lose some of that loyalty, respect, honor side of the martial arts that I hold very close to my heart.
Nice. And I can tell you, in all the years I was involved in it and judging it, I've met one of the nicest people in the world through MMA and one of the biggest jerks in the world through MMA. So yeah, there are all kinds in between, which is interesting. But I didn't know this about you, that you had actually contemplated doing it. So I'm curious, if you would have done it, what would your walkout song have been?
Oh, shit, I have no idea.
No? Okay. See, I thought everyone just had that in their mind. If I ever do something like that, if I ever did MMA or how about then for softball? What was your walk-up song for softball? Do you remember?
It's going to sound really lame now in hindsight, but only the good die young.
Oh, nice. Billy Joel. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. I could see that. Probably not good for MMA, but
No.
that would have been hilarious. So that's so cool. Because I mean, that's another thing too. I've judged over 1,000 fights, and every time like someone comes out with just a horror, I'm like, why did you pick that song? It doesn't fit. It's like you got to put more thought into that. So, and same with softball too. I've actually changed my ringtone because of softball walk-up songs I've heard at the college level. Like, oh, that's really cool. What song is that? So, all right. So in all your years then in martial arts, is there one philosophy you've learned that just stands out? It rises to the top. You still teach it to your students. You keep coming back to it.
I think it's going to sound again somewhat, like everybody says that, right? But just not giving up, like I think martial arts really teaches kids to be confident and not give up and like set goals and to truly work hard. Like if you really want something, you have to work for it. You have to earn it. I think often people think, oh, you train for 3 months, you get your belt. No, you have to earn it. And I think that's one thing that I really admire about martial arts, even in this day and age. Like we don't give belts, like you have to earn them. Yeah. And I think that's something that I really drive home to my students.
That's cool. Yeah. And, and yes, there are some out there that unfortunately do that, but I don't consider them martial art.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. A real martial art, you do have to earn it, and it's not easy to earn. So that's really good. So now you've been doing this for over 10 years. What are your maybe short-term goals for what do you want to accomplish next in martial arts? What's kind of your next on your list that you want to check off?
So I'm kind of dueling between two. Okay. I would like to become, what in Shou would be the equivalent of, this is interesting too, a third degree, or what we call a mongoose master. So in Shou, it's a hybrid of 7 styles, which is the beast arts. Mm-hmm. So unlike Taekwondo, where when you get your second degree in Taekwondo, you learn more Taekwondo. Yeah. Where in Shou, you master an entirely different style. Oh, so wow. I am what we call a bear master and a tiger master. And so now I'm working on becoming a mongoose master, which when people are like, oh, you're a third degree, that's cool. And I'm like, yeah, but in our style, it takes 5 to 7 years to earn each degree. Oh, wow. So it takes a long time. So I'm working on my third and a mongoose master. And the other kind of parallel with that is I would love to get my blue belt in jiu-jitsu.
Very cool. So are you currently training in jiu-jitsu or and if you are, probably not as often as you want to, or?
Yeah, that would be correct. Okay. I train in Minot when I get up there, and I train here and there where I can. But yeah, definitely something I want to do more of.
Okay. Question I actually haven't asked a guest in a while, but just curious, do you think, or maybe you don't think we should, but do you think in our lifetime, we'll ever see martial arts in the public school system?
I wish we would. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a lot. Again, it depends on the instructor. It depends on how it's implemented. But I know in China, it's a requirement.
Yep.
So I think but first we have to get FIAD back in schools before they'd even consider martial arts. Let's be honest. But I do think it would be something that should be implemented, or at least as an elective. I do know that some schools do offer self-defense classes as an elective, which I think that's great. But I do think martial arts has a place with being, teaching kids discipline and things that every kid really could use.
Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge with it, and I actually tried to do it in Fargo years ago at a middle school and had the support of the principal, but the school board said no, and they couldn't get over the fact in their mind that martial arts equaled violence. They would not listen to reason. It was just they had their minds made up before I even stepped in there to talk to them. It was just, martial arts is violence. No, it's not. so yeah, it's getting over the people's misconceptions, I think would be the biggest hurdle in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right. I have some fun questions to wrap it up. Now this one, it doesn't have to be 4, but it can be, people people you've trained with. It can be someone like a Chuck Norris or a Bruce Lee, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names that you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Well, definitely Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee, of course.
Nice.
And then I do have to put Chen Chi Fu Martin up there. I think that he has inspired me at a level that is deserving of some recognition there. And then the other one is probably Kyoshi Klein. I really enjoyed training with him and hope I get the opportunity to do that in the future.
Cool. And that's your instructor's instructor?
No, it's another instructor that specializes in Okinawan karate.
Oh, Mike Klein. fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Mike, I'm actually supposed to have Mike on the show. We've had a pain getting it scheduled, so I need to actually reach out to him again. But yeah, Mike's a super cool guy. He's one of the first instructors I met when I moved up here, and I know he moved away, so that's why it's been harder to lock him down for an interview, but I got to give him a call one of these days. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Ooh, Zen in the Martial Arts.
Joe Hyams. Nice. Is that usually the one you'll recommend to other people too?
I do. I like that one. I think because it gets at the essence of martial arts, thus the Zen part. So I really enjoy that one. As a business instructor, I don't even quite remember the title of it, but I remember reading, when you open a school, there's always these, textbooks basically on how to open a school or whatever. And I wish I could remember the exact title, but it was actually written by a guy from Europe. And it was really a lot of ways inspirational about like, if you're going to do it, you need to jump into it and love what you do. But if you don't really love martial arts, like deep in your heart, then don't waste your time. And so I thought, he goes into it much more than that, but that's kind of the essence of what his book was. And it really spoke to me. So
is there any good books on Shou out there?
There's not. Shou being a Chinese art is very much an oral tradition.
Okay. Because I'd searched and couldn't find anything, because I always love adding new books to my library, and I'd love to learn more about the art myself. So I was hoping to maybe find something to read. But okay. How about a favorite martial arts video game? Were you ever a gamer?
So the Ninja Turtles on Sega was probably the only one I played or know of. So
nice.
Although I shouldn't say that. Back in the day, of course, Mortal Kombat on the arcade games.
Yep.
So yeah.
Okay. So being a huge Ninja Turtles fan, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to my most recent episode that came out just yesterday, but it was Donatello from Ninja Turtles 2 and 3 back in the early 90s was on my show. So you might appreciate.
Totally got to check that one out.
yeah. Stephen Ho, such a cool guy and fun to talk to, and cool story about dancing with Vanilla Ice and everything in that movie. So
I remember that movie.
Yep. Yeah. So does he. He told some good stories about it. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
No, I can't say I do have one. I actually don't watch a lot of TV. Didn't growing up other than the action movies, so I don't have one.
Walker, Texas Ranger.
Well, yes, I don't think of that. Well, yes. I was thinking more like traditional, like Bruce Lee Kung Fu TV shows.
I think Walker has been said probably at least a dozen times, easily, if not more.
No, and definitely. In fact, it was funny when I graduated from high school. I don't know if it was meant to be a joke or not, but like my parents got me the entire Walker, Texas Ranger on DVD collection.
That's awesome.
And sent it with me to college. They're like, here, a piece of home.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think I've actually interviewed at least 5 people that have been on that show now, so that's kind of cool. Not Chuck. Unfortunately, I haven't got Chuck yet. still hoping. All right, how about a favorite martial arts movie? And if you don't pick a Chuck Norris one, I also want to know your favorite Chuck Norris movie.
Don't know. Probably, Delta Force, nice. Isn't really, it's a fight movie. Probably. Yep. So
I love that. And I don't know if you heard me talk on one of my episodes. I told it, I actually just about last October was at my mom's house helping her clean out in her garage. And I actually I still have the 6-foot cardboard poster that was in the lobby of the theater in Little Falls when Delta Force came out. I got the owner to give it to me and I still have it.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
If I had room for it, I'd probably bring it and put it in my podcast studio, but I don't have room for it in here right now. But man, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my God, you still have that? She's like, yeah. So really, really cool. All right. Now this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie, just a favorite movie fight scene.
Anything from the Die Hard series.
Nice. There's some good ones in there.
Yeah.
There's some actually really good fight scenes. I like that. Nice. Well, before I let you go, anything that you want to get out there, talk about, mention, maybe something I forgot to ask you about before I let you go that you want to promote or anything, or... And I'll put links for your school and everything when the episode comes out.
Sure. Obviously, I would love for everybody to come in and try my school. But at the bottom line, just get out there, try martial arts. If you're new to it, if you've never done it, I think it's so interesting, too, because I think people have this stereotype that they have to be a warrior or an athlete to step into any martial arts school. Mm-hmm. And I'm always like, have you not seen martial arts movies? Like, as an instructor, it's our job to take like the weak, the nerd, the stereotypical person and turn them into the warrior, Yep. so that's our job. And so I think just getting out there and trying anything that's in your hometown, or go check out a self-defense seminar, or just get out there and be open to the possibility of trying things.
Nice. And that's one question I wanted to ask you. So your students, are you a pretty even blend between kids and adults? Do you have more than one than the other? Kind of how does your student layout look?
Sure. So pre-COVID, it was probably 50-50-ish. Now we're probably 70-30, 70 kids, 30 adults,
really?
Percentage-wise.
Okay.
Yeah. So we used to be more 50-50. Now we're probably 70-30 as far as percentages go.
And for the adults, do you get a good amount of the parents that try it, or are they completely separate with the adults?
It's of that 30%, it's probably 50-50. It's probably half parents and half walk-ins or different people.
Nice.
So
That's actually really cool. And then just for people who maybe are local and want to check it out, how often are classes and how can they find you?
Sure. So the easiest thing to do would be to look us up on our website, which is shoufm.com. Shou is SHOUSHUFM.com is the easiest way. That's where you'll see all our classes and our listings. We do have classes Monday through Thursday. We offer 2 free classes to come in and try us out. So
awesome. Well, I just want to thank you. This was so much fun. You're so fun to talk to, and you just have this infectious personality, and I love chatting with you, and I can't wait to see you in person. And I'm my goal is to come try out your school myself too. It's just with this podcast, I have no free time. I've wanted to come check it out since you opened, and it's been so crazy. But yeah, I definitely want to. At the very minimum, I'm sure I'll probably see you at the Fargo Open again for sure. So,
of course.
But once again, I just thank you for your time, and it's been such a blast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.